Buenas tardes a todos. Welcome back to the channel. So in this video, I want to talk about the super rich versus the poor people, and just discuss some numbers with you. So I hope you like this one. It certainly made me think when I looked through some of the numbers that I came up with. So, and I've stopped just at Cartagena harbour, and I've wandered down to the harbour edge here, and these super yachts have just caught my eye. Wait till you have a look at these. You know, there's one up on the dock, there's that one in the water, sort of black and white one, and then right next to it is this absolute monster of a super yacht, and it's called the Vava 2. And I've got some information on it, but it just made me think, you know, about people with money. And we often hear that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And I just wondered how true that was. But before we get into that, let me take you through some of the stats of that super yacht, the Vava 2. It's just mind-boggling. This super yacht is 315 feet long and built by Devonport Yachts in England, and it was launched in 2012. It's got a variable depth swimming pool, 4 large tender garages, a fold-down beach club, and a helicopter landing pad. It accommodates up to 36 guests and a crew of 34 people. 34 crew. Now, there's various numbers kicking away, but it would appear that it's valued between 150 to 180 million dollars. And the running costs, annual running costs are between 10 and 15 million dollars a year. So we often hear people in the UK claiming that the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, but you know, is that actually true? Now, you know, I'm not a political commentator, and as many of you know, my wife and I left Scotland almost 3 years ago to live in Spain full time. So you might be saying, well, Duncan, you don't have the right to comment on what's happening in the UK now. However, as a lifelong payer of national insurance and income tax, we over 20 years of that as a 40% income taxpayer, I believe I've earned the right to share my halfpenny's worth. So after a bit of research, I've discovered that there are 3.1 million millionaires in the UK and 156 billionaires. I also found out that the 50 richest families in the UK hold more wealth than the poorest half of the population put together. So I started to wonder, you know, if you had £1 million in the bank and you went on a bit of a spending spree, how long would it take you to spend that £1 million? If you spent, let's say, £1,000 every day. Now, I know you might say that's impossible, but how could you spend £1,000 every single day? Well, you know, people who come into money, you know, lottery winners, etc., they tend to splash out and spend. You know, they buy a big house, they buy flashy cars, they go on exotic holidays and give money to their friends and their family. So, you know, £1 million could be spent much quicker than you think. Now, let's allow for a 3% annual interest rate in savings. So if you spent £1,000 a day, it would take you just under 3 years to wipe out your £1 million. That's ridiculous, isn't it? However, if you only withdrew the accrued interest, which is around £3,000 a month, you would never actually touch your original £1 million. So you could live off £3 grand a month and still have £1 million in the bank. Now that in itself is quite fascinating. But then I thought, how long would it take you to spend £1 billion? Remembering that there's 156 billionaires in the UK. How long would it take you to spend £1 billion if you spent that at £1,000 a day? And this is where I was just completely blown away. So with £1 billion, and again, only allowing for that 3% interest. But you've got to remember that, you know, billionaires and millionaires tend to invest their money to ensure that the money works for them. And they often earn at least 2 or 3 times that interest rate, and much, much higher if they're investing it in high risk. So if you spent £1,000 a day every day, how long do you think it would take you to spend £1 billion? Well, the reality is you could never spend it. Instead, your fortune would keep growing by about 29.5 million every year, even after covering the daily spending of £1 grand a day. So after 20 years, you'd have about 1.8 billion now, meaning your fortune grows by nearly £799 million, despite spending £1 grand every single day. That's staggering, isn't it? Now, the 20th richest person in the UK has 8.75 billion, and the richest person has £37.5 billion. So you can imagine how much these fortunes are grown by every single day. And, you know, between them, they could probably pay for a cure for cancer, or wipe out poverty or homelessness completely in the UK. And, you know, it's also worth considering that millionaires and billionaires and their accountants are experts in utilising completely legal tax avoidance schemes to minimise the amount of tax they pay. Now, to provide some context, let's look at a typical UK pensioner who has paid their income tax and national insurance contributions to the extent that they are receiving the full UK state pension. Now, projections for 2026 indicate that the personal tax allowance is going to be around 12.5 grand a year, and the state pension is likely to be around the same amount. Now, we still have to get final figures finalised, so they're not going to change by that much. So roughly about the same. So what that basically means is that pensioners who have any other small income, you know, maybe a small private pension or interest from savings, so they've taken some steps to ensure they've got a comfortable retirement, they'll almost certainly have to start paying income tax again. Effectively, they will start to be taxed on money they have already paid tax on in the past. In addition, when you consider families on benefits or, you know, in low-paying jobs, there is evidence that people on lower incomes in the UK are getting poorer. Or at least, you know, their living standards are being squeezed, with some variation depending on which group we look at or which cost we consider and over what time period. But, you know, there's no doubt inflation has hit lower income households the hardest, and in many cases essentials like food and energy bills have risen more in relative terms and now eroding incomes even more. Additionally, the ability to afford essentials has worsened for many, with more working age adults now reporting that they're unable to heat their home or keep up with their bills, and increasingly having to use credit cards to get by. Based on this analysis, thinking about those millionaires and billionaires, thinking about that Vava 2 yacht at 150 to 180 million, there you go. It's just blown its hooter right on cue as soon as I mentioned its name there. Maybe they're listening. So based on all of that, it does look like the rich are getting richer and the poorest are getting poorer. So is that right? You know, is that correct? Is that the Great Britain that you want to live in? And it certainly wasn't for us. And it's one of the reasons why we left to live in Spain. So let me know what you think in the comments. As always, you know, if you like the content, just click on the wee subscribe button or scan the wee QR code if you're watching on your telly. Get your phone out and open up the camera and scan that. And you can subscribe. It's totally free. It'll never cost you a penny. And I appreciate if you do that. It really helps the channel grow. So, thanks again for watching. Thanks again for hooting. See you on the next video. Hasta luego.